Hey guys, Scott from Real Estate Outdoors on another episode of this build that's coming together beautifully. Stay with me on this one. It's a short one, but so much happens in this one. It just pieces together perfectly. Stay tuned. You're going to love this one. All right, this afternoon I'm going to cut a couple pieces of 6-inch strips for both sides of the door. I want to reinforce it for the hinges, and I want to reinforce it for the door latch. Also, I need to bring it out to grade because I'm putting 1 inch worth of insulation on the sides, so I need to bring that out to 1 inch as well. So I'm going to cut up a couple of these 1/2 inch strips and glue them and attach them to the sides of the door. Stay with me for this. One of the things I wanted to make sure of before I went any further with this door is to make sure that my gear will fit, and this tent is the longest piece I'll be putting in there, so it went in okay, so I don't have to worry too much. No extra cuts. Now I'm just measuring out these boards so that they just go slightly higher than the door, and then they are 6-inch strips that I ripped off already. I'm just going to cut these up real quick. Now that I have them cut, I'm just going to use some clamps, stick them on, just make sure they fit the way I want. And now I'm just going to slather some glue on here, just some standard white wood glue. I want to make sure they're glued well together and have enough glue to add to the adhesion onto the camper. I will be doing some screws, so it's not too big of a deal. Now I have my countersink bit here, and I'm just countersinking some holes. And then I'm going to fire some screws in there. I've already checked to make sure they don't go all the way through the wood, so they don't stick in and poke my eyes out. That'd be a bad thing. So I'm just ripping off some countersinks and adding some screws. Hey guys, I definitely want to mention Cutter Creek Outdoors, who is a sponsor of this episode. They have been integral part of getting this camper from scrap to this beautiful camper that you see behind me. If it wasn't for them, this wouldn't be even an issue. Thanks very much to Cutter Creek Outdoors. It's insulation time! Chill out. But I'm not gonna, because I'm gonna have insulation and heat. Pow! Yes! Let's go! Okay, I'm just adding a couple extra of the stirrups across the back before I get finished up here and get that insulation started. I'd already started putting one on there and putting it in place to see how many I needed, and I realized I didn't have enough and I had to go to the store and get more, so it was a good thing that I did that test. So here I'm just cutting pieces to size, and one of my favorite glues for styrofoam is Great Stuff Gaps and Cracks. If you've ever used a spray foam, you know it sticks to absolutely everything, and it ends up being way better than glue. So I've used that here to adhere it into place, and once I had them in, I just added a few screws just to keep, because it expands, so you don't want it to be pushing off of your styrofoam, and you don't want that to have a big gap. So I glued it on with that spray foam, and then I put some screws into it. Now I'm just taking my X-Acto knife and going around the edges using the actual frame as the trace and cutting the styrofoam down and getting the shape back. And this thing is coming together fast now. It's looking sweet. No matter what job you do with that spray foam, there's always tons left over. So I'm just going to use them, use it up, and fill in as many cracks as I can find. Might as well spray it in. I built a little switch cover out of a piece of walnut, and I drilled 4 holes in it, and I attached 4 switches into it, and now I'm just measuring to find the best place I'd like that switch set to be. I think it ended up being just a little lower than I would have loved, but in this case it'll work out fine. So now I'm going to get my wicked new saw out. I love this thing. I'm going to cut a hole into it and get that switch plate mounted and get ready to do some electrical work. This is the first time I've owned one of these tools, and I cannot say why I've never had one of these before. I don't know, but holy mwah. Oh, this is lovely. There are laws in some states about being affectionate to your tools, so FYI. Now I'm just going to carve out the styrofoam for this and put the switch plate in place, add a few screws, and it's ready to go. Now you'll just want to run your sander along the edge just to smooth that styrofoam out to take the perfect shape of the actual frame itself, so there's no weird bumps and lumps. So when you put on your surface, it doesn't get a little bumpy in it. You don't want that after the amount of time you spent. Then I'm just going to use the sander to sand down some of the spray foam that's dried off around the edges of the wood and the edge of the door frame. Get this smoothed out. The inch styrofoam didn't stick out past my 1 inches of wood, so I didn't have to sand down a whole bunch of styrofoam, which is a good thing. It was perfectly level. Here's a quick shot of the wood on the surface. These shots are a little bit out of order because right now I'm just going to do some wiring and some soldering, and then I will show you how that wood went on. Scuff marks, it doesn't actually ruin the sheet itself. Like I said, I've only got 2 sheets and I don't want to wreck it. So I just use my jigsaw best I can and my new multi-tool here
to get some perfect cuts.
Put some PL 400 on it. I got a few screws that are going around the edge where it'll be trimmed with cedar. So it's gonna look friggin' awesome. And this composite, aluminum, plastic, or composite, and then aluminum. It's hard to flex. Here's a piece of it. And you can bend it. But the cool thing is, I don't have a hammer handy, but it is impervious to denting. There's no dents on that, but it's so light, and it's not all aluminum, but the outside is aluminum. Here's a piece you can see that was cut from my router. It's just a thin piece of aluminum, but it's nice and light. And it's going to give the outside of this camper a professional, smooth surface I can put my graphics onto. I'm pretty stoked.
I just used a regular closed steamer here, and I just attached the handle to an actual vacuum handle just so I could stand the heat better. Okay, back to the wood. You'll see the lines on here. I actually drew them out, and I was going to gouge them with the circular saw, but after a test, I just couldn't get it right. It was just too thin, and I was afraid I was going to cut through it. So I just ended up spending a lot of time, approximately 45 minutes to an hour on each side, bending it, or steaming it, I'm sorry, and then I added these ratchet straps on. So about every 5 minutes of steaming, I would click these ratchet straps down one more bit, and at the end, it actually was bent and followed the curves perfectly. And it dried nicely and it looked amazing. But I came back after it had dried for over 40 hours, and it sprung back, which you can see here, and then I just ran some screws as I went, laying it down and getting it into position, and then just continued to lay screws down on my trusses, and it went down wonderfully. Then I started on the back, which has a much steeper curve, and it was going pretty good. And do you remember that butt from earlier?
Well, I did some cuts. It still didn't bend. I steamed the heck out of it yesterday. The back side, I steamed it for almost an hour. I got it to bend. It stayed in position. I screwed it on and it split. So I'm going to show you guys that now.
The crack was pretty severe in two places along the back, and you could see a bit of it on the inside. But when you stay with me in one of the future episodes, I'm going to show you how I fixed this, and you couldn't even tell that it had ever happened. Make sure you ring that bell and subscribe so you can see that future episode. I measured up the curves on the actual camper itself using that curly tape you see there, or fabric tape. I knew where it started and where it finished, and then every inch I cut halfway into the styrofoam, which was tedious and messy, and it got everywhere, but It was very satisfying, and the curve worked amazing. I couldn't believe how well it worked. On the surface, you'll see there's a piece of wood running across the top, and I added that, and I can't find the recording for it, but it was to house my two work lights that I'm going to put on there for driving and for just nighttime extra lighting. And I put 2 bolts into it to protect the 2 nuts that I seated into the wood. And so getting this styrofoam in place, I just banged it on there. I measured where that spot was, and then I had to cut some slots to house that board. But it caused me a bit of an issue coming up. Stay tuned for that.
Pro tip, if you're gonna cut this stuff, cut it outside. It gets everywhere and it's static and stuck on everything. Oh my God.
It was flexing so beautifully, but when I tried to lift it, the bolt held it in place and it broke. But as you can see, it was an easy fix. I was able to glue it and put the other piece right up against it nice and snug and put a screw into it, and you can barely even see where it was. And for the final touches, I'm just going to use up the rest of this great stuff and fill all the cracks and seams, and it should be a pretty airtight camper. Then I'll just let that dry out and sand the edges smooth again, and she is one well insulated camper.
Well, that's a wrap on this episode, and thank you very much for hanging along this far. The camper is just one big, wicked, happy family now, and now that we got the insulation inside on, we got the roof in, this is going to finish quickly. Most of the stuff coming up now will be small, tedious work, just to make it look really nice. So thanks for hanging in. I'm Scott from Realistic Outdoors.